Okay, this is, I'm labeling this lecture 5, although additional lectures were not originally planned for this class. As you know, things have changed. So I'm just numbering this lecture 5 at this point, and we're doing an introduction to Microsoft Access and relational databases in general. At this point in time, we have one problem that I'm attempting to resolve, and that is that we have an inconsistency between students as to what materials and equipment they have, which is the reason I had you do the surveys. Unfortunately, students were depending on having access to the KVCC labs for the computers in some cases. So some people have laptops that may or may not have Microsoft Access or Office on it. Some people are operating off of different devices that cannot even run that software and certainly don't have access. In addition, not everyone has the MindTap software that has the Microsoft Access simulator that we could use as well. So I am attempting to resolve this as cleanly as possible, and I'll be making a decision fairly soon on what we're going to be able to do about that once everyone does their surveys and I get some idea of what's out there and who has what. So that's why we have a delay on that. So for the moment, we're just going to have this lecture on this information. There'll probably be a couple more at least, and then we'll proceed from there. There will be a quiz that you can do after this lecture as well. Okay, about Microsoft Access. Access is a database management system, or DBMS. It basically is a all-in-one type of software that combines what's called a relational database engine with a graphical user interface. A lot of databases out there that are used by professionals actually don't have that front end built in, or sometimes they have something that's less functional. Microsoft Access is made for users who are not database administrators or programmers, and that's one of the reasons for its popularity. It's been around for nearly 30 years, and since its inception in the 90s, it's become part of the Office Professional Suite. It is not part of the Office 365 any longer, but you can get it as part of a larger Office suite, and it still comes with that. It typically doesn't lend itself well for large multi-user databases, but it is popular in small businesses or what you might call a personal database application. So one of the reasons for the popularity of Access is its usability. So it is very popular for users who really don't have any training in actual database management, and again for small businesses that don't have an IT department. Works pretty well for that. It comes with this front end, which is what you're going to see when you start up Access. So it doesn't require any other application to use. It's self-contained, which is different from many other databases which are not self-contained, and you have to have some sort of programming language on top of it in order to use it. It's also highly integrated with other Office products like Word and Excel, and it allows anyone who's inexperienced to create database applications pretty quickly, things that you're going to learn about called queries, forms, and reports, and they can be created in a very short time frame. Advanced users can still use this as an external database and access it with other languages like Visual Basic or scripting languages like Java for use on internet websites. The next subject we'll take a look at is how do you access these databases? How do you get to them and give them commands? There's something called a standard language or standard query language. It's actually called Structured Query Language or SQL. And that's a standard set of commands that is given in a very specific format, much like a programming language that allow you to perform tasks in a database like adding, changing, deleting, or querying database records. Now, Microsoft Access uses this SQL like just about every other database management system out there. However, it also comes with something called QBE, which is Query by Example, which is basically a mouse-driven uh, front-end program that allows you to point and click and create queries without knowing the SQL language. So the use of that is optional, and somebody who is classified as an advanced user or power user can still use SQL for database communications, but normally most users will do this with QBE, and you'll be seeing that a little bit later. Now, some people actually are very good at using Excel like a database. As a matter of fact, Excel can hold quite a bit of information and can be used to manipulate some very large spreadsheets, but there are some limitations. And Microsoft Access is designed to more easily take data similarly structured to a spreadsheet and manipulate it using various methods. It also has the ability to create what's called different views of the data through something called queries, which we'll take a look at later. And it can also easily create reports and also forms that allow you to enter data in a very organized manner. So this is one big advantage it has over Excel. What I usually tell people is if you're working with Excel and you get some really huge tables in there, they become more difficult to manipulate, and that's where you want to take a look at moving that into an Access database. So let's define what a database actually is. Generally speaking, it's a collection of information that's organized so it can be accessed, managed, and updated. So in its very basic form, it's made up of at least one or maybe more tables, which we're going to take a look at what that is later. But it's structured the same way as you'll see the structure in an Excel spreadsheet, which you're already familiar with. So just like a spreadsheet, tables have rows and columns. A large database can in fact have hundreds, some databases have even thousands of tables. And they are often related together in what's called a relational database by relating different fields in the tables to one another, and that's what creates this relation between the tables. Now, we're going to take a much closer look at that later. Besides tables, a database, including an Access database, can contain other objects. In our case, queries, forms, and reports. Okay, the next thing we're going to look at is what exactly is a table. So they are, of course, the primary objects in a database. And as I said before, they are very similar to Excel spreadsheet tables. They use rows and columns to represent data. But spreadsheets, of course, for your columns, as you recall, use A, B, C, and so forth to name the columns. Where in tables and databases, they are named by something called a field name, which is simply an arbitrary name that you assign to it. As long as it's unique, it's fine. Also, the rows, of course, in a spreadsheet are 1, 2, 3, etc. on down. And each of those refers to a record in a table. So a record is the same thing as a row. Sometimes, just like Excel, though, in a database, you will assign records a unique identifier called a primary key. This is not required, but usually is necessary if you want to be able to relate this to other tables. So the primary key often resembles that record or that row number in Excel. Okay, this is just a more graphical explanation of spreadsheets versus tables. So on the left here, you see the basic structure of an Excel spreadsheet, which you have been accustomed to. So your columns are named A on down, and the rows are numbered on down from 1, etc. Now, in an Access table, it's a little different. So instead of A, B, C, etc., these are field names, and this is not literally the field name. You actually give each field or column a unique name, so that could be something like name, address, city, state, something like that, whatever is contained in that column. And the records are simply from top to bottom. Each one is a data record containing information that goes together. So that first field there could in fact be similar to this numeric row numbering, because usually you will have a primary field that is numbered just like that. All right, let's first take a look at a Word document with a table. So this is a document that I've inserted a table, and that table contains all the Marvel Universe movies that have been created up to this point in order of release date. So in Word, our table has the headers up here, and of course the name of the table and the information. Now with Word, there's a limited amount of things you can do with the information inside this, since effectively each one of these cells is in fact treated as a paragraph, so you can do all sorts of formatting and that sort of thing, as you're familiar with, but you cannot do much else with it. So the next thing we're going to do is take a look at this in an Excel spreadsheet. Okay, this time we have the exact same table. This time it's in Excel instead of Word, so you can see all the same information here. And we're going to do something interesting with this that we did not do in class in our labs. It's usually part of the more advanced Excel. But if we select these fields, we can actually go to the insert and convert this to an actual table. And once you've done that, this table actually will behave a lot like a table in a database. And you can try this yourself if you want. So it looks pretty similar, except now you've got these pull downs. You can actually remove records from the view by clicking these. So I can remove all the Iron Man movies, for example. You can see that that does that. You can also do sorts, change the sort orders, and all sorts of different things that you can do with these to treat them like a table in Excel. So some of the abilities that Access has is duplicated in Excel. Simply does not have as much ability to do what you're going to see can be done in Access when we get into different objects like reports and queries and that sort of thing. But as you can see, you can actually have functional tables in an Excel spreadsheet, and many people do use them in this matter. Okay, this time you're going to be seeing the data in Microsoft Access. This might be the first time for some of you to have seen this particular program. So I've loaded this into a table, and when you open Access, you don't see much on the screen. But when I double click this table, you'll see the contents of it. Now, we're not going to go too deeply into it right now, but there's, of course, a lot of things this does. One thing to be familiar with is you can have different views of the data. So this has a data sheet view, also a design view, which we'll look at later. So I'm going to change it back to data sheet view, and you can see it's the same information here before, but note the new field. This is an ID number, and that's what we call a primary key. Typically you will assign a primary key field like this when you import data, because you have to have somewhere in there a unique record identifier. So usually it's a good idea to have that be just a numeric value. So that's what we have here. So that's an extra column that you didn't see before, but everything else in here is the same. So we'll be taking a much closer look at how this is done in Access a little bit later. So this completes this lecture. I'm trying to make them fairly short, but there will be a quiz after each of these until we get to the point where we're ready to at least attempt some sort of labs. So this again is an essay quiz, and I've been hoping that people have been reading these instructions. I'm not sure everyone is, but this is an essay quiz. It has to be in your own words. I've been noticing occasionally people have been either cut and pasting or simply retyping what they're reading on the lecture, and that's pretty much plagiarizing. The school does not like that too well. So please do not do that. On an essay quiz, make sure you're answering the questions in your own words, because I will know if they're taken directly out of the lecture because I wrote the lecture and I'll remember that. So that's pretty easy for me to see. And please do not Google the answer and cut and paste that either. It's actually pretty easy to tell if somebody's done that. So please put it in your own words. There's not going to be very many questions. Shouldn't take very long to complete the quiz.